All right, so you're here because you want to get to the bottom of things, right? You're done with all the noise and all the fluff. You want the real deal when it comes to fat loss.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing today. Today, we're diving deep, like really deep, into those persistent myths that surround exercise and nutrition for fat loss.
Myths that we all hear all the time.
Yeah.
You know, the stuff that might actually be holding you back.
Absolutely. We're going to try to cut through that fog. And to help us navigate this, we've got a great source, a special report, actually.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
So this is a report by Christian Finn, who has a Master of Science over at thefactsaboutfitness.com.
Okay, so we know this guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, he's got some serious credentials. And this report is titled, Revealed, the 5 fat-burning myths that cost you hours of wasted time and effort.
Okay, so that title alone is pretty attention-grabbing. I mean, who doesn't want to stop wasting time and effort when it comes to fat loss, right?
It's a powerful statement. And that's precisely what we're going to do in this deep dive. We're going to dissect these 5 myths, pull out the real actionable insights, and help you focus on what actually works.
I'm ready. Let's debunk some myths. What's the first one we're tackling?
All right, so the first myth that really stood out from Christian's report is one that I'm sure you've heard before.
Oh, I bet I have. Lay it on me.
It's the idea that you need to exercise for at least 20 minutes, a solid 20 minutes, before your body even begins to burn fat.
Oh, yeah, the 20-minute rule. I've heard that one countless times. Like there's some magic timer in our bodies that only flips on after that 20-minute mark.
Right, and anything shorter is supposedly just a waste of your precious time.
So what does Christian say about this? Where does this myth come from?
He points out that this myth probably stems from a misunderstanding of how our bodies use fuel during exercise.
Okay, fuel sources, carbs, fat, all that good stuff.
Exactly. It's true that in the initial stages of exercise, our bodies tend to rely more on carbohydrates for energy.
Because carbs are a more readily available energy source, right?
Exactly. They break down quickly and easily. And then as the exercise continues, especially if it's longer duration exercise, our bodies start to gradually shift towards using more fat for fuel.
So that's where the 20-minute mark comes in. People think, okay, got to get past that 20 minutes to hit the fat burning zone.
Right. But here's the thing, and this is what Christian emphasizes. That whole idea kind of misses the bigger picture when it comes to fat loss.
Okay, the bigger picture. I'm intrigued.
The bottom line is this. Fat loss ultimately comes down to creating a calorie deficit. You need to burn more calories than you consume over time.
Calories in, calories out. It's the fundamental principle.
Exactly. And whether you create that calorie deficit by doing one long workout or by doing multiple shorter bursts of exercise throughout the day, the end result, the impact on your fat loss, is what matters most.
So it's not so much about when those calories are burned, but the total amount burned over the course of the day or the week.
Right. Precisely. So if someone only has 10 minutes during their lunch break to squeeze in a workout, that's not a reason to skip it altogether.
Yeah, those 10 minutes can still contribute to their overall calorie deficit, right?
Absolutely. In fact, even short bursts of high-intensity activity can be super effective for calorie burning. Think about high-intensity interval training, or HIIT.
HIT, yeah. That's a popular one these days. Short bursts of all-out effort, right?
Exactly. And even a few minutes of HIIT can elevate your heart rate and burn a significant number of calories in a very short amount of time.
So even if it's just a few minutes here and there throughout the day, it can add up.
Absolutely. And what's more, those shorter workouts, those 10-minute workouts, they're often more manageable.
They're easier to fit into a busy schedule.
Yeah.
And if it's easier to do, you're more likely to stick with it in the long run. Consistency is key, right?
Exactly. Consistency is king. And that brings us to a couple of interesting studies that Christian cites in his report that really support this whole idea.
Okay, studies. I love some good research to back things up.
So there's one study from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine that focused on overweight women.
Okay, overweight women. And what were they doing for exercise?
The researchers divided them into 2 groups. One group did those traditional longer workouts, 20 to 40 minutes at a time.
Okay, got it. The traditional approach. And the other group?
The other group split their exercise into multiple 10-minute bouts throughout the day.
Okay, interesting. So same total workout time, just broken up differently.
Exactly. And here's the surprising part. The women who did those shorter 10-minute workouts actually lost significantly more weight over the 20-week study period.
Wow, really? How much more are we talking?
The 10-minute group lost an average of 20 pounds.
Okay, 20 pounds. That's impressive.
while the group who did the longer workouts only lost an average of 14 pounds.
Wow, that's a pretty significant difference.
Yeah.
So breaking up those workouts into shorter, more manageable sessions actually led to better results.
It did, and it really challenges that all-or-nothing mentality that many people have around exercise, right?
Yeah, you don't necessarily need a huge chunk of time to make progress.
Right. And there's another study, this one published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition, that also found that shorter workouts can be just as effective for weight loss.
Okay, tell me about that one.
So in this study, they had participants doing either 3 10-minute exercise sessions, 2 15-minute sessions, or 1 30-minute session each day.
Again, same total workout time, just different ways of splitting it up.
Precisely. And they found no significant difference in overall weight loss between the 3 groups.
So whether you do one longer workout or a few shorter ones, the weight loss results were pretty much the same.
Exactly. Now, it's important to note that this particular study didn't look at changes in body composition, so we don't know if there were any differences in muscle versus fat loss between the groups.
That would be interesting to see. But overall, it definitely supports the idea that shorter workouts can be just as effective for weight loss.
Yes, absolutely. And the main message here, the takeaway for our listeners, is that you don't need to let a lack of time derail your fitness efforts.
Yeah, don't let that be an excuse.
Right. Those shorter periods of activity that you can fit in, they really do add up, and they can contribute to your overall calorie burn.
So true. All right, let's move on to myth number 2. What do we got?
All right, this one's about the calorie burning power of muscle.
Oh, muscle. The more you have, the more calories you burn.
Yeah.
Right, like that's what we often hear.
Exactly. You often hear claims like, a pound of muscle burns 50 to 100 calories per day, even at rest.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. So if you just build enough muscle, you can practically eat whatever you want and still lose weight.
Right. It's a very appealing idea. And to be fair, it is true that muscle tissue is more metabolically active than fat tissue.
So it does burn more calories.
It does. And gaining muscle does increase your resting metabolic rate, which is the number of calories your body burns just to keep functioning.
Okay, so building muscle does have a positive impact on your metabolism.
It does, but here's the catch. The actual increase in calorie burn from gaining muscle is much smaller than those often quoted figures of 50 to 100 calories per pound per day.
Okay, so it's not quite the metabolic miracle that some people make it out to be. What's a more realistic estimate?
Well, Christian's report actually brings up an interesting point about fat tissue. We often think of fat as just this inert storage depot, but it actually plays a role in metabolism as well.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, fat tissue secretes hormones and other substances that can influence our metabolism.
Interesting. So it's not completely inactive.
Right. And while its metabolic rate is lower than muscle, it's still estimated to burn around 2 calories per pound per day.
Okay, 2 calories per pound for fat. And what about muscle?
Christian estimates it to be closer to 6 calories per pound per day.
6? Wow, that's a huge difference from those 50 to 100 calorie claims.
A massive difference. So let's say, hypothetically, someone managed to lose 2 pounds of fat and gain 2 pounds of muscle.
Okay, so a swap of 2 pounds of fat for muscle. What kind of impact would that have on their daily calorie burn?
Using those estimates, they'd be looking at an increase of roughly 8 calories per day.
8 calories. That's it.
It's a relatively small change in their overall resting metabolic rate.
So building muscle is good for overall health and fitness, but it's not going to magically skyrocket your calorie burn.
Exactly. It's important to have realistic expectations. And there's another layer of complexity here that Christian highlights in his report.
Okay, what's that?
Our bodies aren't always great at doing 2 things simultaneously,
2 things like
building muscle and losing fat at the same time.
So it's tough to do both effectively at the same time.
It can be, especially if you're not new to exercise or if you're not carrying a significant amount of excess body fat.
Right. So what's the recommendation then?
Christian suggests focusing on one primary goal at a time.
Okay, so either focus on building muscle while minimizing fat gain, or focus on losing fat while trying to maintain as much muscle as possible.
Exactly. Choose one primary objective and go all in on that.
Makes sense. It's about being strategic with your efforts.
Precisely. And while resistance training is important for preserving muscle during a diet and has other benefits like increasing post-exercise calorie burn, the impact of muscle itself on your resting metabolism is often overstated.
Got it. So let's not overhype the metabolic effects of muscle. It's just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. All right, ready for myth number 3.
Hit me with it.
This one's something that I think a lot of busy people can relate to, the feeling that weight training is just too time-consuming.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely felt that. It's like, oh, I got to go to the gym and spend hours lifting weights. Who has time for that?
Right. It can feel like a huge commitment. And that perception that weight training requires these long, dedicated sessions can be a real barrier for a lot of people.
A barrier to even getting started.
Absolutely. But Christian highlights a really smart strategy in his report that can help overcome this time barrier.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about this strategy.
He calls it focusing on workout density.
Workout density. Okay, I like the sound of that. What is it exactly?
It's basically how much work you can pack into a specific amount of time.
So getting the most bang for your buck, time-wise.
Exactly. And one of the most effective ways to increase your workout density is by utilizing supersets.
Supersets, right. I've heard of those. It's where you do 2 exercises back to back,
You
right?
got it. Instead of doing all your sets of one exercise and then moving on to the next, with supersets, you do a set of one exercise and then immediately move to a set of a different exercise with minimal or no rest in between.
So you're basically cutting out a lot of that downtime between sets and keeping your body working more continuously.
Exactly. And Christian actually clarifies the different types of supersets that you can use.
Oh, there are different types.
There are. So you've got your traditional supersets where you pair exercises for opposing muscle groups. Like you do a set of bicep curls followed by a set of triceps extensions.
Okay, so you're working opposite muscles. What else is there?
Then you have compound sets where you do 2 exercises back to back that work the same muscle group.
Okay, so really hammering that muscle group. And what's the last type?
The last type is called staggered sets. And with staggered sets, you alternate exercises for different muscle groups that aren't competing with each other.
Like what? Give me an example.
Like doing a set of squats and then immediately doing a set of dumbbell curls.
Okay, so you're working your legs and then your arms. Makes sense. So what are the benefits of using supersets?
Well, one key benefit is that it significantly elevates your metabolic rate.
You're burning more calories, right?
Exactly. And not just during the workout itself, but for a prolonged period afterward.
So the calorie burn continues even after you finished exercising.
It does. And there's also research suggesting that supersets can shift your body's fuel utilization towards burning more fat.
Whoa, really? So you're saving time and potentially boosting fat burning at the same time.
That's the idea. It's like a double whammy.
That's awesome. Are there any studies that back up these claims?
Yes, Christian mentions a study from Colorado State University where active young women did a 100-minute workout that included supersets of compound exercises, like bench presses and bent-over rows.
Okay, intense stuff. And what were the results?
The results were pretty impressive. 16 hours after this workout, their fat burning rate was over 50% higher, and their resting metabolic rate was elevated by about 4%.
50% higher fat burning for hours after the workout. That's huge.
It's significant,
Yeah.
and it really highlights the potential of supersets, especially for those who are pressed for time.
So for anyone listening who feels like they don't have hours to spend at the gym, incorporating supersets into their routine could be a game changer.
It could be. It's a way to make your weight training much more time efficient while still getting a great metabolic boost and contributing to your fat loss goals.
I love it. Okay, let's move on to myth number 4.
All right. This one might surprise you a bit. It's the idea that the absolute best way to lose fat is by combining cardio and resistance exercise.
Okay, that seems pretty logical. Burn calories with cardio, build muscle with weights. What's wrong with that?
On the surface, it makes perfect sense. And it is true that combining cardiovascular training and resistance training offers a ton of benefits for overall health and fitness.
No one's denying that.
Right. But Christian's report emphasizes that exercise alone, even a well-rounded combination of cardio and weights, might not be the most effective way to achieve significant fat loss.
Interesting. So what's the missing piece of the puzzle?
It all comes back to diet.
Ah, nutrition. Of course. You can't outrun a bad diet, right?
Exactly. The report really highlights the paramount importance of diet when it comes to fat loss.
And I believe there are a couple of studies mentioned that really drive this point home.
There are. The first one is a 12-week study from Penn State University where they divided women into 4 groups. A control group, a diet-only group following a low-fat, high-carb plan, a diet plus aerobic exercise group, and a diet plus both aerobic and resistance exercise group.
Okay, 4 groups, each with a different approach.
Right.
What did they find?
The findings were quite interesting. The women who followed the calorie-restricted diet and did aerobic exercise, they had the greatest amount of fat loss.
So diet and cardio proved to be the most effective combination for fat loss.
It did. But here's the surprising part. The group that added resistance training on top of the diet and cardio actually ended up losing about 3.7 pounds of lean muscle mass.
Wait, they lost muscle? I thought weight training was supposed to build muscle.
It is. But in this particular scenario, there are a couple of likely reasons why they lost muscle despite lifting weights.
Okay, I'm curious. What were the reasons?
The report points out that the total calorie intake on the diet was very low, only about 7 calories per pound of body weight, which is quite restrictive.
Okay, so they were in a pretty significant calorie deficit.
They were, and the diet itself was also very high in carbohydrates and relatively low in protein.
And we know protein is important for muscle building and preservation.
It is, especially when you're in a calorie deficit.
So even though they were lifting weights, the very low calories and the low protein intake likely contributed to muscle loss.
That's the takeaway. It highlights the fact that it's not just about cutting calories. The macronutrient balance, particularly getting enough protein, is crucial for maintaining muscle while losing fat.
Right, it's about quality as well as quantity.
Absolutely. And the second study mentioned in the report really emphasizes how critical diet is for fat loss. This one was published in the Journal of Applied Physiology, and it looked at 31 women who participated in a very demanding 6-month exercise program.
Okay, 6 months, that's a long time. What was the program like?
They were exercising for 90 minutes, 5 days a week, doing a mix of weight training, running, and even military drills.
Wow, there's over 7 hours of exercise per week. They were really putting in the work.
They were, but here's the thing. Despite this incredibly demanding exercise regimen, their average fat loss over the entire 6 months was only about 5.7 pounds.
5.7 pounds, that seems incredibly low considering how much they were exercising.
It is, and the key factor that the report highlights is that the participants were not given any specific dietary guidelines. They were allowed to eat whatever they wanted.
So there was no control over their diet.
Right, and this really illustrates that even with a very intense and consistent exercise program, if your nutrition isn't dialed in, significant fat loss is going to be extremely challenging.
So exercise is important, but you can't out-train a bad diet.
That's the bottom line. Nutrition needs to be your primary focus if you want to lose fat, and then exercise acts as a powerful supporting tool to help you preserve muscle mass, improve your fitness, and burn some extra calories.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's tackle the final myth, number 5. What is it?
This one's about something that a lot of people strive for: the ability to simultaneously lose fat and build muscle.
The holy grail of fitness. It sounds amazing. Shedding fat and gaining muscle at the same time.
It does, doesn't it? But Christians suggest that it might be a bit more challenging than we often think.
Okay, I'm sensing a but coming.
Yeah.
Why is it so challenging?
The main reason boils down to the opposing energy demands of those two processes: muscle building and fat loss.
Okay, explain that a little more. How are they at odds with each other?
So to build new muscle tissue, your body needs a calorie surplus. You need to be eating more calories than you're burning to provide the building blocks for that new muscle growth.
So you got to feed those muscles.
Exactly. On the other hand, to lose fat, you need a calorie deficit. You need to be eating fewer calories than you're burning so that your body starts tapping into its fat stores for energy.
Okay, so two opposite things. One requires eating more, the other requires eating less.
Exactly. And if you try to do both at the same time, you're essentially putting your body in a metabolic tug of war.
It's like trying to drive a car forward and backward at the same time. You're not going to get very far.
That's a great analogy, and what Christian points out in his report is that even when you're in a calorie deficit, your body isn't primarily using stored fat to build new muscle.
Really? Where's it getting the energy for that?
Building muscle is an anabolic process, which means it needs energy to build things up. And that typically comes from the food you eat.
Okay, that makes sense.
While fat loss in a deficit is a catabolic process, which means your body is breaking things down for energy.
So they're two fundamentally different processes.
They are. And while some minor simultaneous changes are possible, trying to make significant progress in both directions at the same time is going to be really difficult for most people.
So what's a more realistic and effective approach?
Christian recommends a phased approach to your training goals.
What does that mean?
Instead of trying to maximize both fat loss and muscle gain at the same time, focus on one primary goal at a time.
Okay, so have a dedicated muscle building phase and then a dedicated fat loss phase.
Exactly. During your muscle building phase, your main focus is on building muscle while trying to minimize fat gain.
So eat a little bit more, lift heavy weights, and focus on getting stronger.
Precisely. And then during your fat loss phase, your primary goal is to lose fat while trying to preserve as much muscle as possible.
So dial in your nutrition, create a calorie deficit, and keep lifting weights to maintain that muscle mass.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point that Christian makes: the need for realistic expectations.
What does he say about that?
He says that it's far more realistic to aim for something like losing a moderate amount of fat while gaining a small amount of muscle, or vice versa.
Okay, so don't expect to shed tons of fat while packing on slabs of muscle at the same time.
That's usually not going to happen, especially for those who aren't brand new to weight training.
Okay, how do you know when to switch between these phases? Like, when do you go from building muscle to losing fat?
One method that Christian mentions is using your body fat percentage as a guide.
Okay, so monitor your body fat and use that to dictate when you switch gears.
Exactly. For example, you might aim to bulk up to a certain body fat percentage during your muscle building phase, and then switch to a cutting phase to reduce it back down.
Makes sense. But as we know, accurately measuring body fat can be a bit tricky.
It can be. So Christian also shares some more subjective, perhaps less technical, ways to gauge when it might be time to shift focus.
Okay, like what? I'm curious.
For example, during a fat loss phase, he might consider it time to stop cutting when his lower abdominal muscles start to become less defined due to a bit of fat accumulation.
Okay, so when those abs start to disappear a bit, it might be time to switch back to building muscle.
Right. And when focusing on building muscle, he might shift back to a cutting phase when he starts feeling consistently irritable, tired, and demotivated from the more calorie-restricted diet.
So when those mental and emotional signs of dieting fatigue start to set in.
Exactly. And of course, when he's satisfied with his current level of muscle mass.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot. And I love that he also mentions using the strategy of booking a photo shoot as a firm deadline for the end of a fat loss phase.
That's a great idea. Talk about motivation.
It is. But the main message here, the takeaway for our listeners, is that while some minor simultaneous changes are possible, significant fat loss and muscle gain are best approached as separate sequential goals.
Exactly. Focus on one primary objective at a time for more targeted and ultimately more successful results.
Awesome. Well, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive into these common fat loss myths. Huge thanks to Christian Finn's report for providing so much valuable insight.
It was a great source.
It was. So just to quickly recap for everyone listening, we tackled 5 big myths. The idea that you need those 20-minute workouts to burn fat, which we debunked. Shorter bouts absolutely count.
And then we talked about the often exaggerated calorie-burning power of muscle. It's a benefit, but it's not going to single-handedly solve all your fat loss problem.
And then there's the myth that weight training is always too time-consuming. We learned about strategies like supersets that can make it much more efficient.
Right, and we can't forget about the importance of diet. Exercise alone, even a combination of cardio and weights, isn't going to magically melt away fat if your nutrition isn't in check.
And finally, we addressed the myth that you can easily lose significant fat and build significant muscle at the same time. A phased approach, focusing on one goal at a time, is generally going to be much more effective.
Absolutely.
So the big takeaway from all of this is that knowledge is power. The more you understand about how your body works and what truly drives results, the better equipped you are to make informed decisions about your fitness journey.
I completely agree. It's about cutting through the noise and focusing on the strategies that are backed by evidence.
So as you continue on your own fitness path, I encourage you to really think about which of these widely held beliefs might have influenced your past or current approach. Are there any assumptions that you've been holding on to that might be holding you back?
That's a great question for everyone to consider.
It is. Because sometimes simply shifting our mindset and challenging those long-held beliefs can open up a world of possibilities.
I couldn't agree more.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for those goals. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.